Welcome to the Entrepreneur Gene. I'm your host, Laurie Barkman. Each week, we'll hear from founders and CEOs to explore key decisions they've made for growth, value creation, and challenges along the way. This show is sponsored by the Business Transition Sherpa, offering entrepreneur advisory services from transition to transaction. Don't forget to hit subscribe, follow us for the latest episodes, and visit thebusinesstransitionsherpa.com for more exclusive content. Let's dive in. Welcome to another episode of the Entrepreneur Gene. I am joined today by one of my favorite people. He and I became fast friends a couple years ago, and I've gotten to know him in such a variety of ways. I'm so impressed by him. And I'll tell you a little bit about him. First of all, he is an entrepreneur who is growing a very exciting business. He's a keynote speaker. He's an author. He travels all over the place to meet great people. He's a connector. He's a super connector. And he's the best-selling author of his book, Rise of the Reader. Please welcome to the show, CEO and founder of BookThinkers, Nick Hutchison. Nick, how the heck are you?
I am doing so well. There's no place I'd rather be. I love connecting with people like you and spending time talking about one of my favorite subjects, entrepreneurship. And anyway, all smiles on my side of the microphone today.
I love it. I love it. Nick, right out of the gates, I got a question for you. Is there an entrepreneur gene, and what does it mean to you?
As somebody who has read hundreds of entrepreneurship type books, iconic biographies, autobiographies, stories of entrepreneurship, and built a couple of businesses myself, I've noticed that so many entrepreneurs are rebellious. They tend to be rebellious. They weren't the best students, so they rebelled against their school teachers. They weren't the best, well-behaved kids, so they rebelled against their parents. And they didn't want to subscribe to the normal 9 to 5. So they went out there and they built a business where they had more control and they could exercise more of that rebellious tendency. And, entrepreneurs solve problems. And I think that oftentimes the problems that we recognize come from our dissatisfaction with how things are done today. And that's a little bit of a rebellious nature too. So when I think of entrepreneurship, I think of a rebellious person. What about you? Do you agree with that?
I do. I think there's something really interesting about this concept of a rebel. And it was one of my favorite films growing up. Don't ask me why, but James Dean, Rebel Without a Cause. I just thought he was such an interesting character in that movie that the notion about being a rebel sometimes comes across as a negative. And I think the way you're using it, Nick, is it's coming across to me anyway as an exciting positive. So let's just unpack it a little bit. Maybe share a little of your own experience. Were you that rebel growing up, that you just kind of had to forge your own path?
In a lot of ways, I was. I mean, if you ask my mom about what kind of student was Nick like when he was younger, she would say he was capable, but he chose not to do the work. And I'll give some examples. I mean, all throughout my years in school, I could do all of the testing. I could comprehend everything that was being taught. But a lot of times I found myself bored and I thought, are there ways to work the system? Like I took AP calculus in high school and I had a 0% homework average because I learned on day one that homework only represented 10% of our grade. And if I just tested well enough, I didn't need to do any of the homework. And so there are so many examples of that as I was growing up. I always wanted to be the black sheep. I always wanted to be a little bit different. I always felt a little bit different. And so like you said, it was never a negative representation of wanting to be different. It was always just, I was curious and I was playing different scenarios in my head and how could I navigate this differently and how can I be my own person? And that's sort of why I decided to start my own business too, because I was okay as an employee when I had my first couple of jobs, but there were things that were slow that I wish I had more control over. And so I thought one day I'll start my own business because then I'll be in the driver's seat and I can do things differently and nobody will be there to tell me that I can't.
I love that. And I think there's also a perspective of, I'm not going to just accept status quo. This problem exists. I'm going to come up with a better way. And you've gone ahead, and we're going to talk a little bit about how you're doing that for the people that you care about, people that you work with. Let me ask you a question about challenges. We all face challenges as entrepreneurs. As the CEO, the founder of your company, what's the biggest challenge that you're facing right now?
Just one? No, I'm just kidding.
You can pick many. It's okay.
BookThinkers, the agency that I own, has been growing. It's been doubling year over year for the last couple of years in terms of revenue and the number of clients that we're serving. And so one challenge that we have is setting ourselves up for scale. And we're in the middle of redoing our entire back-end infrastructure. We were using so many different systems and keeping track in so many different places. We had no SOPs in place. And I sat back and realized that if I really want this thing to grow, if I really want to build for scale, put all of the systems in place, add all of the little action steps that get automated to make the customer experience with each one of our service sets better, make it easier on everybody that works for my business to execute their duties, we've got to overhaul everything. And so we hired a consultant a couple of months ago who's sort of like a back-end systems engineer. And we're getting everything centralized in one system and defining everything in the back end of the business. And I'll tell you what, change management is hard. It's hard to get buy-in from everybody on your team to use new systems that they're not familiar with. And it's hard as a business owner to work on my business and in my business at the same time. It's not easy to do. So it gives me even more respect for all of those big business owners out there.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear you talk about this, Nick, because it's just too easy to kick the can and not work on these hard things, right? It's hard to do this stuff. And you've made the budget of time, money, and people to address it. So good for you. And I know you and I have talked offline about how to grow the value of your business. And I truly believe this is going to pay dividends for you. So while there's the expense today, the recognition that this is an investment is a good way to look at it.
Yeah, well, thank you for that acknowledgement. And listen, a lesson from your book, like somebody literally couldn't buy my agency today, even if they wanted to, because they would step into this unstructured, chaotic mess in the back end. But if somebody comes knocking on my door a year from now and they say, "Hey, Nick, I want your business," and the dollar value is right, like I have a series of systems that I can hand over to somebody else that will be easy to interpret. And so thank you to you for just helping to change my perspective on some of those things.
Oh, wow. Well, you're very welcome. So a related question for you is, what advice do you have? We have lots of entrepreneurs listening who are probably going, "Oh man, I could really use some of that mojo that he's got there on trying to fix the back office." What are one or two things that you really want to emphasize there for people to take action on?
Well, there's been a big perspective change for me over the last couple of months when I did an exercise with a company called Strategic Coach. And it was called a life extender exercise. And it essentially has you project out your working years. And one of the things that I did was I took the next 25 working years and I realized that there are 100 quarters over the next 25 years. And if I made small incremental improvements quarter over quarter, as they compound and grow, I'll be in a wildly different place. And extending the timeline helped me gain a little bit of objectivity. It helped me look at it from a third party perspective and realize that I have a ton of time to make these improvements. And so I suppose the moral of that story is that slow and steady wins the race. You don't have to do everything overnight, but if you can make small improvements, little small steps in the right direction, they will compound over time and help you reach that destination. And it doesn't need to be a scary process. What's the most reasonable little 1% improvement you can make today that points you in the right direction? And so if you're listening to today's show or watching it and you are feeling like your back end is totally unstructured and chaotic like I was a few months ago, you might be able to delegate, hire it out, pay somebody else to come in and restructure, or buy some great books on business back ends like The E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber or Traction by Gino Wickman, because that's a really small investment and it will give you little steps to make in the right direction.
Awesome. That is so powerful. And a third plug would be maybe a book called The Business Transition Handbook.
That's a great choice too.
What's the value of making those investments? And the reality is you're going to make your company better and more fun to run in the short term, but you're also going to be adding enterprise value for the longer term. So just to layer that big picture in it from a scorecard standpoint is what we call it, the owner scorecard. So let's tie it all together. And now thinking about the future, you've laid out some things you're doing right now, some challenges. Nick, what are some things that you're really excited about for the future?
Well, I'll tell you what, I am so happy in the present moment today because I'm not overwhelmed by my future anymore. I've hit a place in my business where things work. I enjoy everybody I work with. I enjoy everybody I work for. Um, I have great work life balance. And so I'm really focused on enjoying the present moment and milking it for all it's worth. And in the past, if you were to ask me that question a year or two ago about my future, I would have been a little overwhelmed. Like, yeah, I want this big business, but I have no idea how we're going to get there. What am I excited about for the future right now? Just more of the same on a bigger scale, helping more authors promote and market their books, helping more entrepreneurs and coaches get out there and land new clients. I'm excited to start my family. My wife and I are pregnant. Well, she's pregnant. I'm just kind of observing it, but she's due in a month. So build our family, and maybe there'll be some book related stuff for the kids. I'll enter that world once we get there. But then as far as the industry as a whole of book marketing and book promotion, you know, having a personal brand full of people, an audience full of people that love you for what you do, raving fans that you can really provide value to. It's just becoming more and more important because we're bombarded with so much information every single day. And so thought leaders like you, who we can tune into on a very regular basis, daily, weekly, consume your content, get involved in your courses, listen to your podcasts, read your books. Like it's all so incredibly important. And I just think people that are of value to their community, like you are, will continue to be more and more successful over time. So I'm excited about that for the industry.
I love that. You're a very positive person. You exude that positive energy, and it's pervasive throughout your company and your growing family. And I'm really excited for you. Baby on the way. And yeah, I am fully expecting a book from you on parenting in the future. I can see a book recommendation list coming in the short term, right?
Yeah, I think that there'll be an entirely new brand actually. So I'll say that here first.
Ooh,
Because outside of my own personal reading for business and everything like that, all of my personal reading outside of the business stuff is now about childhood development. And I'm realizing also that a lot of my favorite authors have written children's book versions of their adult book, whether it's on entrepreneurship or mindfulness or gratitude or whatever the subject is, health and fitness. There are so many great children's book resources out there for varying ages. And I haven't been able to find a place that consolidates all of that information for people. So, yeah, I think I'll be heading down that route a little bit as a side quest, maybe in 2025.
I love that. Maybe I should do an Entrepreneur Gene book and a children's version. And you heard it here first.
Nice. I love it. Yeah, why not? I mean, there are so many children who have that entrepreneurship gene of rebelliousness. They might not fit into the standard school situation. They might not love the traditional education system. Maybe they're too smart or too different and they're looking for something else. And I'm just realizing that there are so many great resources out there, but there should be even more.
Yeah. So if someone wants to start an entrepreneur academy for elementary and middle school kids, they should call us.
Yes, they should.
We are on to something here.
I think we might. Yeah. Hopefully the right person is listening to this. And if you are, reach out to both of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Nick, something you were talking about earlier, just this phrase comes back to me and it sticks with me all these years, that sometimes in life we recognize that it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? And you were talking about that earlier for your 25-year game plan and breaking it out by 100 quarters. Therein lies a great example. The other thing that really resonated is, and someone said this to me, who's an entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur, he buys businesses, grows them, and then sells them. And he just says he's unemployable. you know? So I think there's sort of this duality here that we're looking ahead, we're looking for the long term, and we kind of want to do it on our own terms as a rebel, but doing it with a purpose. And I also love how you've integrated in this bigger mission and kind of for your legacy. And you're a young guy, but you're already thinking about some of those really impactful things in your world. So good for you. So this first half of the show, we have learned a lot from you. And the second half of the show, we want to learn more about you. So Nick, tell me a bit about the Nick origin story.
Well, I always love to start at the age of 20 because that's really where the biggest pivot happened in my life. prior to the age of 20, I had a wonderful childhood, an amazing family. I played sports. That's mostly what I focused on. I alluded to this before, but I wasn't the best student. And everything sort of changed for me when I took an internship going into my senior year of college at a local software company. It was a sales internship. And my boss at the time introduced me to the world of podcasting. So, shows just like this, where a host interviews a series of guests, and those guests talk about what they've done to become successful and whatever their discipline was. And he said to me, Nick, listening to the same song or the same playlist on your commute to work is great. It's fun, but it won't change your life. The right podcast could, though. And so I started listening to podcasts to and from work. I had a 1 hour commute each way during that summer internship. And I started to hear all sorts of entrepreneurs share with us for free how they became successful. And so many of them, I noticed, gave at least some credit to a book that they had read, or they had written a book themselves, and that's why they were being interviewed. And so I started to hear the same names over and over and over again. And one day it just hit me like, if I'm choosing deliberately not to read books because it's not cool or something like that, or I'd rather hang out in the dining hall than read, well, then I'm choosing to be less successful than I could be if I decided to read. And so I went to my local Barnes and Noble one day during a lunch break. I grabbed about 10 books from the shelves, a few that I had heard on the podcast and a few that just caught my attention that promised to solve some problems that I was dealing with. And I went back and I started reading. And that's really where my life changed. That's where I feel like I woke up and became conscious for the first time. And what's interesting, and I'm just realizing this for the first time now, Laurie, is that so many of those books, they play to that rebellious nature. You know, if you think about Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, he says that poor and middle class people learn poor and middle class money habits because money is not a subject taught at school. So not everybody's on the same playing field. It's taught at home. And if you want to break that paradigm, if you want to escape the rat race, right? It's all this language about rebelling outside of the norm. Then you need to study rich people who teach their kids rich money habits. And you start to think about things in a different way, right? These books are condensing decades of somebody else's greatest life lessons into days of reading. And so anyway, that's my origin story, the best that I can tell it. I really didn't wake up until 10 years ago when I was 20 years old.
Well, you've got such a tremendous opportunity in front of you at recognizing the traits that you bring to the table, the risk taking, the big ideas, and then you've got the vision, and people are obviously want to support you, and you're building a great team. So let's just hone in on Book Thinkers for a second. You know, what are you really excited about when it comes to Book Thinkers? You talked a little bit earlier about it, but you know, here's an opportunity just to showcase what Book Thinkers does a little bit more.
Sure. At a high level for everybody, Book Thinkers is a marketing agency that helps authors promote and market their books. We do it through short form video content where, you know, you fly out to somebody like Laurie and you spend a day building 50 videos that you can use on social media. We do podcast booking, so placing authors on shows to talk about their books. And then we also have a large community of nonfiction book lovers that we share books in front of. So if anybody wants good book recommendations, feel free to head over to Book Thinkers, spelled just like it sounds, on Instagram. We've got about 180,000 followers at the time of this filming, and we're always looking for new people to join the community and collaborate and interact with us.
Yeah, you guys do an amazing job there.
Oh, thank you. You know, what am I excited about with the business? I am just excited about helping more and more people. I mean, I genuinely believe at my core and in my bones that the right book at the right time can permanently change somebody's life. And the number of messages that I've received is the reason that I keep going. It's people in our DMs or sending us emails or asking to get on a call, and they'll say, "Hey, Nick, 3 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago, you recommended a book and it caught my attention because I was dealing with a problem and the book promised to solve it. So I bought the book and it sat around for a little while, but I just finally got a chance to read it. I implemented what I learned and my life is completely different. I removed a problem, I built a skill, whatever it was." And we get so many of those messages. And that's why I keep going. That's what I'm excited to do, is continue to help people change their lives by getting them connected to the right resources.
I love it. I love it. If you could go back in time and give young Nick some entrepreneurial advice, what would it be?
I would say you're doing it the right way. Just put your head down, keep working. Don't compare yourself to others. You're on the right path. Keep moving. Slow and steady wins the race. No matter how many times the tortoise and the hare are going to race each other, the tortoise always wins. Shout out Aesop's fable there. And that's the lesson is like, I would say, hey, because there was a lot of uncertainty. Am I making the right decisions? Am I on the right path? Am I serving people the right way? Am I providing enough value? I think those things are always going to be front and center when you're facing uncertainty, paying the bills and that kind of fun stuff as you start a business. But I would just say, Nick, you're on the right path. You're doing the right things.
Absolutely. You talked a little bit earlier about your growing family and some interests that you have, and you're spending good quality time before the baby comes. What are some other things that you enjoy doing outside of work?
I have recently gotten into endurance sports. So I just did my first sprint triathlon a couple of months ago, and I have another one coming up soon. Yesterday, I ran my first Spartan race, which is like an obstacle race course. That was a ton of fun. And I'm in the gym a lot. I play basketball a couple of days a week. So my physical fitness and continuing to test my body and my mind, I love that outside of the business. And then I think other than that too, international travel is, I mean, it's my favorite thing other than books. It's my wife's favorite thing other than books. We've been so fortunate enough to work remotely for the majority of the last 10 years. And so we've traveled to so many different countries together. We love exploring new languages and cuisines and cultures and excursions and monuments. And, we're both a little bit of adrenaline seekers. So all of those things kind of make up my free time, the endurance, the books, and the international travel.
Yeah, thematically, right? It's a marathon, not a sprint, but you're doing sprints, so maybe it's both.
It's a little bit of both. Yeah.
It's a little bit of both. Well, that's fantastic. Nick, it's just been a pleasure to talk with you on the Entrepreneur Gene. And you mentioned earlier where people can find you. We're going to put those links in the show notes. And if there's any other things you want to mention about people connecting with you, what's a great way for them to reach out?
Can I share one more story real quick with everybody?
Oh,
And
absolutely.
I promise it'll tie back. So last year, my wife and I were on our honeymoon, and we were traveling to a couple of different spots in Europe, and we ended up in Dubrovnik, Croatia, which is a small city in and of itself. Population's only about 65,000 people, and we were staying in an area outside of Dubrovnik, about 30 minutes. And this little community might have had 500, 1,000 people in it. I'm not quite sure. But anyway, so we around this little cove, we saw a restaurant that it was kind of like a bar. It had flashing lights. And so we wanted to walk over to it. And on the way over to get a couple of drinks, we saw another restaurant, beautiful seating, sun was going down. And she thought, tomorrow we should eat here. And we wanted to make a reservation, but the line was super long. So we just thought on our walk back, we will. So we go, we have a couple of drinks. We stayed a little longer than we wanted to. And on the walk back, the restaurant was closed. All the chairs were up on the table, doors were closed, nobody there. And she was a little bummed out, but we're on our honeymoon. And I had had a couple of drinks, I'll admit, and I was feeling confident. I said, let me just walk inside and see if anybody's there cleaning up that can help us. And so I jiggle the door handle and it's open. And so I walk inside and there's somebody putting away silverware in the back. And I approached him. I said, hey, excuse me. I know it's late, but I'm looking to make a reservation for tomorrow night. Can you help me? And he turned around and he looked at me and his eyes kind of lit up. And he's like, of course I can. By the way, I'm a huge fan of yours. And I was like,
What?
yeah, I get goosebumps every time I tell it. And I was like, a huge fan of what? Like thinking he totally had no idea who I was. And he said, Book Thinkers. And I was like, jaw on the floor, right? This tiny little place in the middle of Croatia. I'm from the US. Just, I had no idea. I still have goosebumps. And, I had had a couple of drinks. So I was like, I wanted to test him. I was like, prove it. And my wife's over here like, stop it. Like he loves Book Thinkers, whatever. And he goes on with all these incredible details about the books I've recommended over time, podcast interviews I've hosted. Like he even mentioned things that I had ever only posted on stories. Like, remember that time you were at MJ DeMarco's house and you posted his basketball court? He's my favorite author, blah, blah, blah. And just jaw on the floor. And of course, we went back the following night and we had dinner. We got to talk with him a little bit more. And here's kind of the moral of that story for me. What was interesting was I asked him, like, what are your social handles? And I looked him up, and he had never interacted with our page before. He followed BookThinkers, but never commented, never DM'd, nothing like that. And so here's the moral of the story. As creators, as a podcast host, as an Instagram creator, we put a lot of value out into the world. And sometimes we don't know if people are listening or watching. And so because this show is new and because Laurie's been providing so much value for such a long time in other places, if you have been positively impacted by her, reach out, say thank you, shoot her an email, shoot her a DM, rate this podcast, leave it 5 stars. If it's helped you, share it with somebody else. Because again, like, positive impact is only felt through feedback. And I never would have known that I had impacted this guy in Croatia so much because he never reached out to tell me. He didn't think his messages would be seen. And so I just wanted to say that to everybody in your audience today.
Oh my God, what a beautiful story. And thank goodness you had a witness. Your wife she can say, yes, this actually happened. That's a crazy, very, very cool, amazing story that you're probably going to tell over and over, as you should, because that is truly incredible.
Yeah.
Wow. That's awesome. Yeah, speechless. And I'm also so appreciative of your comments about ways to support the show. Really, really appreciate that. So thank you. Nick, it has been so fun to have you on the Entrepreneur Gene. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity.
And to our audience, like Nick said, if you learned something today or you laughed, show us some love, leave a rating and review, or tell someone else about the show. We really appreciate you. Thanks again to Nick Hutchison for being with me. This has been another exciting episode of the Entrepreneur Gene. We'll see you next time. Hey, that's a wrap. This show is sponsored by the Business Transition Sherpa, working with entrepreneurs who want to escape feeling like a prisoner in their own business and to eventually let go flawlessly. If you loved today's episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And if you want to help support the Entrepreneur Gene, I'd encourage you to leave a rating and review. Ratings and reviews truly help our show grow and get in front of more entrepreneurs just like you. If you do leave a rating and review, we'll be so happy. Take a screenshot of it, send it to my email, Laurie@btsherpa.com, and we'll send you a free digital copy of my book, The Business Transition Handbook. And we'll also enter you to win one of our monthly swag boxes. For show notes, including links to everything in today's episode, be sure to visit btsherpa.com. Also, as a reminder, you can watch this full video interview on our YouTube channel for the Business Transition Sherpa. While you're there, be sure to check out videos from our award-winning podcast called Succession Stories. We'll see you next time on The Entrepreneur Gene.